Hey, my name is Joel. You know, for most of the 20th century, bass drums were 14 inches deep. And by bass drums, I don't mean concert bass drums and marching bass drums and things like that. I mean, in the 20th century, early 20th century, the 20s and 30s, when the drum set as we know it started to become an actual thing, the bass drums that were used for it, though much larger initially in diameter, were 14 inches deep almost exclusively throughout the 20th century up through the 1970s. But in 1979, I became aware of an alteration to that, in that I got the 1980 Ludwig catalog. I remember thinking, it's not 1980 yet, but I've got the 1980 catalog. But looking through that and looking at the bass drum page, where they give you all the available sizes for bass drums, they had classic bass drums, all of which were 14 inches deep. And then they had power bass drums. Power bass drums. Why were they power bass drums? Well, they were 16 inches deep, not 14 inches deep. Up to then, I'd never really thought about the fact that bass drums were 14 inches deep. But power bass drums were 16 inches deep. They were more powerful. So powerful, in fact, were those bad boys that they needed 2 sets of spurs to hold those things in place. So 4 spurs, not 2, which is of course silly, but I did think they looked cool. I still think they look cool, and was brilliant marketing on Ludwig's part and really visually set apart the deeper drums from the shallower drums. But from that day forward, I was sold on deep drums. And in fact, a few years later in 1984, late 84 or early 85, I forget, I got my first new drum kit, and it was a Tama Imperial Star kit in what Tama called their extras sizes, which was their version of power sizes. By then, of course, every drum company was making deeper sizes or power sizes, whatever you want to call them. But the extras, they had extra depth, extra power, extra performance, right? And that's what I bought because I wanted the deeper drums. And so that was a 22-inch bass drum that was 16 inches deep on that particular kit. And several years later, in 1990, I ordered an AOT custom drum kit that was also a 22-inch bass drum, but it was 18 inches deep. Now, this is before Ray Ayotte actually went into larger scale production. He was still producing drums out of the back of his Drums Only store in Vancouver, British Columbia. That's when I ordered mine from him. And so, since they were custom, I got to tell him what dimensions I wanted. And so sold was I on power sizes that I actually got squared dimensions for the toms, 8 by 8, 10 by 10, 12 by 12, 14 by 14, etc. But the bass drum, 22-inch diameter, still happy with that, but I wanted extra power, so I got 2 more inches. I got that thing 18 inches deep, which was not the norm at the time. Still, 16-inch was the norm even for deeper drums. But of course now, today, 18 is pretty standard. But I got that kit, and then I started playing in different bands in the early 90s, and that's when I really started having opportunities to go into the studio and record and to hear playback and really start to get familiar with the way drums sounded when recorded. And of course, by the end of the decade, I was into full-time audio production, recording, and was running my own studio. And so for the next several years, people would bring drums in or they'd use mine. And so I started to be able to compare my drums, sort of my house kit, I guess you will, that AOT kit, later joined by others. But people would bring in their own kits, and so I got really familiar comparing my drum sounds to others, and I was consistently impressed with the sound of shallower bass drums. People would bring in a 14-inch deep drum, maybe a 22 or a 24 or something, and it just, I don't know, I was just really drawn to what felt more like an extended low end, and a little bit more authority, a little bit more punch. I wouldn't say attack, but I definitely would say punch. And so over time, I began to kind of consistently favor the shallower drums, so much so that I eventually bought some other drums. And of course, I have many drums now. And with the exception of one, all of my bass drums are 14 inches deep. In fact, one of the more pivotal moments for really starting to think about what made bass drums sound the way I wanted them to sound was when I bought a 1968 Ludwig 20 by 14 inch bass drum with the natural maple interior in psychedelic red. Gosh, I love that color. And I've since outfitted that with matching toms and stuff too. But I was shocked the first time I mic'd up that drum. It sounded so much bigger than its physical size. It was weird to look at it and to listen to it recorded because it just sounded so much bigger. In fact, it had more authority than my AOT. I'm sorry, Ray. It had more authority than my 18 by 22 inch AOT bass drum. And it just felt bigger, more authoritative. So that was a real eye-opening experience for me. And from that day forward, when I would go do sessions at other people's studios and stuff for other projects, I would take the Ludwig, the 20-inch Ludwig bass drum along with my AOT toms, and got some strange looks when I would come in. People were like, this is a rock date, right? Like, you want a kind of a big sound. Oh yeah, just trust me, and everyone was shocked at how amazing that drum sounded. And I still have that drum to this day. So over time, I just began to realize that I really liked the sound of 14-inch deep bass drums. So all these years later, I thought, you know what? I'm going to actually do a formal test. I'm going to make a video, and I am going to take an 18-inch deep bass drum. I'm going to record it as is, stock, and then I'm going to take 4 inches off that thing, make it 14 inches deep, and record it again. Same mics, same heads, tuning, placement, mix settings, everything absolutely the same, just a shallower drum, to see what the difference is. So after that long intro, that's what this is all about. So I'm down here on the floor to show you the bass drum I'm going to do this with. It is an early 2000s, like a 2005-ish probably, Pacific CX series bass drum, 22-inch diameter by 18 inches deep. This is a sugar maple shell, 8-ply, I believe, and it's white marine pearl that is now kind of unevenly yellow marine pearl. That kind of aging of the wrap is not unusual for these particular drums. It's 8 lugs per side instead of the more common 10 lug for a 22-inch drum. I think that was a cost-saving measure. I've had this drum a while, planning to do this with it, and I'm finally getting around to it. But in preparation for it, I, many months ago, sealed the interior wood of this thing, because the inside of these from production are bare. They're unfinished wood. Still sugar maple, but I like to seal them because most all professional drums are sealed. And so I sealed the inside with some teak oil, I believe is what I used. A couple of coats of that. Anyway, I'm going to record this. I'm going to take it by John Zoogs. He will cut 4 inches off the thing and cut a new bearing edge to match the original. We'll drill new holes for the lugs and everything, put it all back together, tune it back up the exact same way it is now, mic it the exact same way it is now, and we'll compare and see what they sound like. This should be really, really interesting. So that's a good sounding drum. I mean, that's a good sounding bass drum. After I recorded that bit of audio, I took the drum to John Zoog, had him take 4 inches off the length of that shell, making it 14 inches deep, so it's now 14 by 22, and he routed a new bearing edge identical to the previous one, and sanded it and made it nice, finished it. And then I drilled holes for the new lug placement, and then reassembled the drum. And then I used the same mic placement, same tuning, again, same mix settings, gains, all that kind of stuff was absolutely identical. And this is now what it sounds like. So that, to me, seems pretty different. Now, I don't know how different it sounds to you, considering that I did a lot of talking in between the first version and that version. So I'm going to play those again for you, but I'm going to change them out every 2 bars. We'll start with the 18-inch stock depth, and then the 14-inch cut down depth, then the 18-inch and the 14-inch and the 18-inch and the 14-inch, etc. Every 2 bars consistently, so you can really do some comparison. And again, I really do strongly recommend that you use speakers, good, flat, extended frequency response speakers that have the best low frequency response, particularly because that's kind of a significant difference between these two, and I really want you to experience that. So use those if you can to listen to this, and set it to a loud enough level that there's a visceral sense about it, that you can feel what's happening on the low end and not just hear it. Because I want you to feel the sense of punch and authority, as well as to hear the differences in things like attack and resonance and stuff like that. And just notice the differences between 18-inch deep and 14-inch deep bass drums. Pretty interesting stuff, huh? I am pleased that this little experiment did what I thought it would do. It demonstrated what I thought it would demonstrate. And whether or not one is better or worse is, of course, in the ears of the beholder. Not everybody has the same opinion, and I'm not saying that my opinion is the right opinion. Deeper bass drums have a different characteristic, and you may prefer that. But I just thought this would be a useful exercise for people to actually hear not just an 18-inch deep bass drum versus a 14-inch deep bass drum, because there may be other variables, that are making or contributing to the differences that you might be hearing between those drums, but actually using the same actual drum, the same heads, the same mics, signal path, mixing everything, and changing only the depth of the drum, really. So I've tried to be as scientific as possible about this, and all of the little audition sections in this video, it's all sectioned out with time stamps below. So go back again and just listen to these and compare them. Spend some time with it. I think it's pretty educational. I think it's just cool. So I kind of geek out on this stuff anyway, as you know, if you watch my videos. And I hope that you enjoy this. If you do, please hit that like and subscribe button if you are not yet subscribing. And do please share with like-minded individuals. I am just humbled and thrilled that you're watching this. And if you have stayed this long, I'd love you to just leave me a little message below just to say, I got to the end, Joel. I just like to know who gets to the end of these things, because sometimes they get pretty long. But I really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. And I will look forward to seeing you next time. Take care. Bye.